So here in this video I wanted to show how in 17 weeks I turned my VW T3 from this into this. So guys, welcome back to the channel. In this video we're going to be looking at all the different elements of the build, including costs, the various different stages of the build, time and some of the other challenges that I had to overcome during the process. So we're going to show all the stages from start to finish, how it was done. At the end of each stage, I'm going to show a summary of the costs, and at the end we will reveal the total. So first and foremost, the location of where I did the job here in Morocco is in the small town of Aourir, located about an hour from Agadir Airport. For the first few weeks, the main job was to try and uncover as much of the problems and rust as we could. We were finding that a lot of the holes had been covered with fiberglass. When the windscreen came out, we found a lot of deep rust here around these seals. We also exposed this area here on the front bumper, which had been covered again with fiberglass. Which brings us then into stage 2, where we started to cut out a lot of the rust and start welding in new parts. This stage is without doubt the most difficult, most costly and labour intensive. And so with most of the cabin now welded, we moved on to the exterior areas like this bumper, which required a fair bit of work. Moving from here to weld all the areas around the front window. This here was probably the most delicate part of all the welding that was done, due mainly to the fact that it joined onto the fiberglass roof. Just as a note on the stages that I've put together, there was a lot of crossover. So I was welding, for example, still 3, 4, 5 weeks into the build. But just for ease of this video, I've just broke it down into the 12 different stages and parts of how the build came together. Had to take all the floor up inside the cabin, remove all the kitchen and expose yet more holes here. And so that was it for that stage. Moving now on to the rush treatment, where we painted a lot of these areas that had been welded with this special paint. A quick side note here, it's very important to allow this paint to dry for enough time. This stage didn't really have any costs for labour, as I did a lot of the work myself. I did replace some of the insulation and wood though. Decided to reuse the flooring as well, or replace this in the summer. I did a lot of the painting here myself as well, so saved on the labour costs. Quite tricky to calculate exactly how much I spent here on materials, as it was a lot of small figures which add up over time. At this stage I employed someone pretty much full time to do all the mastic, as it is quite a specialist job. I pretty much worked alongside Brahim, the guy who done the mastic. Anytime Brahim was working elsewhere, I'd look to him for guidance on what to do to keep the job moving. Which brings us on to the final stage of mastic. This finition, as it's known, can either be applied by hand or painted on with the gun. At this point, I had to move out of the van full time because pretty much everything was now masked up or covered with newspaper inside. When things get to this stage, this is the vital part where you can really improve the finish just by spending that extra bit of time on these small details. I removed, for example, the rear window right before the paint stage to make things that bit easier. For obvious reasons, this was the most enjoyable part of the process, made a whole lot harder by the way that I'd dismantled everything in such chaos. Spending time organising things as they come off will save a lot of time in the end. This had to be done as well, this hole for the... So I've done a good accurate rundown on the costs. The materials unfortunately are a bit of an estimate because I purchased a lot of materials every day in small quantities. The biggest expense of course was purchasing the paint, which cost me about 150 euros. Which brings us on to the final chapter of this video, which is reflecting on what I learned during the process. There were many things of course that I learned through this process. The 120 odd days that I was in the garage seemed like an eternity and seemed like it would never actually end. So above all, if you're going to take on a project like this, you've got to remember the amount of resilience and determination that's needed to keep pushing on through the most difficult times. Giving up for me was never on the cards because it physically wasn't possible. I couldn't just leave because everything was dismounted. One very simple thing that you can do to ensure that you don't find yourself in a similar position to how I was is to make sure that the people that are working with you or the people that you are going to get to help with your project are very reliable and follow their word as often as possible. A lot of these garages all around the world, not just in Morocco, but a lot of garages have a lot of work on, and so sometimes it can be a case where they take on more projects than they physically are able to deliver at a reasonable time scale. I was so eager to get going with my project that I kind of decided to do it myself, and that put me in a position where I was sort of then reliant on guys in the garage that I was in to help, but also who also had their own work to do on other projects around it. As a result, I was always waiting the longest to get anything done. Obviously because there'd been other people there before me who had agreed prices and had timescales to sit with and to follow. The guys that I worked with in the beginning as well were friends, so halfway through when they sort of walked away and had other things going on, it was very difficult for me to really do anything about that and also say a lot to them about it because obviously they had kind of other things going on. That old saying of mixing friends and business together is always problematic, and this was a perfect example of that. The price that I've put there down, the total of 2,000 euros, I think is slightly under what I actually spent because there was a lot of materials that I would constantly be buying every day, that I found it very difficult to estimate or track the total costs for these materials, because I never really kept a tally of it. A perfect example of that would be the anti-rust paint. I kept obviously painting this anti-rust stuff on the bodywork every time we exposed the metal, just because I didn't want it to rust if it rained. But then we'd obviously sand it back again at a later point or another time. So there was a lot of that going on. Little things like sandpaper, grinding discs, mastic, paint brushes, the list goes on and on. I do hope, however, this video has helped, giving you a little bit more of an insight into what is involved in a project like this. Drop your comments below, guys, as to what you think of the build. If you haven't already checked out the 10-part series, it goes into a lot more detail as to what went on. It's a lot more to do with the relationships that I built with the guys there in the garage. A big thanks for watching this video, and hopefully soon I'll be back on the road exploring once again. Much love and speak soon.